real digital humans.
Hi, this is Stefan Albert with the Real Digital Humans podcast, sponsored by Asia. And today we have Mike Seymour, a great researcher, prolific writer. He's got a whole range of articles out there on digital humans. And he's done some fantastic pragmatic work, which is why we actually found out about the work that he was doing. We're looking as part of the research that I've been doing at the University of St. Gallen, where they've been trying to tease out what drives the value from digital humans, how do they work, and how do you improve them. We came across many papers from Mike, so it's great to have you on the show today. And I'd love to hear, maybe you could present a little bit more of your background. It's a long list in LinkedIn of the work that you've done in the past and you're still currently doing. So I'd love to hear more about that too.
Well, thanks. And thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it. So I'm a researcher at the University of Sydney, where I have a research lab, which is the Modus Lab, where we're looking at digital humans. And my background is actually from the film and entertainment industry, from having worked in VFX for many, many years. So I guess I was keen to get back to doing research and using a bunch of the tools and techniques from VFX. And so sort of about 2016, we started doing serious digital human work. And we did a lot of work and have done work with a range of people around the world, kind of very generously giving their time and energy, like Epic Games and Disney Research in Zurich and USC ICT. And yeah, so we've been looking at digital humans from the point of view of how people will use them, interact with them, adopt them. But to do that, we needed to build a bunch of digital humans because, it's all very well doing this stuff theoretically, but actually it works much better if you have what we like to call a thingatron, an actual something to be playing with and testing on. And so we've had multiple iterations of digital humans with different techniques up into and including the stuff we're doing at the moment, which is very much machine learning and AI based.
Yeah, and you're actually using some of your thingatrons, if I remember right, in the research that you're doing, in this academic research, to be able to test some of your different assumptions, hypotheses, and come out with some results. What have been, let's say the three most interesting results that you found that were surprising for you or was surprising for the audience that you're sharing this with around digital humans?
Well, I guess one of them isn't actually surprising, but it was a kind of really useful thing to do right out of the gate, which was there was kind of an implicit assumption when we started that it was a good idea to do digital humans, but no one had actually taken the time to make an advanced digital human and find out if there were real advantages for users in doing that. I mean, we all were kind of in a race to do it, right? But the question was really at some point, hey, if we just did a cartoon version, would that be just as good? Like, are we kind of wasting our efforts trying to make a realistic digital human? And so one of the first big experiments we did around 2017, 2018 was to validate that if you have a very realistic digital human, one that interacts and has emotion and conveys sentiment, then you're going to have more trust, more affinity, more empathy with that than you would with, say, a very well done and visually appealing but unrealistic kind of cartoony kind of version. So avoiding silly for a second, if you just did a kind of a caricature of somebody that might seem appealing, that's actually good, but nowhere near as good as doing an actual very realistic digital human. So that was a good first step. And then the interesting second step, I think, was we had people saying, well, this is all very well and good, but if I was actually talking to an AI, I think that'd be kind of creepy, right? Like, I mean, these digital humans from a looking point of view, great. But if I actually had to interact with it, yeah, I don't know, I'd like that. I think it'd be kind of creepy. And so we did a whole lot of experiments that followed up on that to ascertain, is that actually true if you did it for real? And we discovered that most people are notoriously bad at predicting how they'll react to a digital human. So to kind of trivialize it, if you said to somebody, hey, would you like to have a AI tell you what to do and where to go and stuff? They'd be like, no, absolutely not. Terrible idea. And then you say, right, and do you use Google Maps in your car? Oh, yeah, happily. It's like, so it's telling you where to go, isn't it? And where to turn and stuff. And like, oh, that's completely different. And so we found in a whole lot of situations that people would predict that they would behave one way and then behave completely quite differently in reality when actually interacting. And we put some of that down to system 1, system 2 kind of responses, like you're over intellectualizing it when you think you're not going to like it. And then I guess the third thing that we came to understand is that that there's at the moment still a preference for actually using a real person, like talking to a real person. We haven't surpassed that. But that being said, digital humans definitely sit in a gap that sits above chatbots and above kind of automated systems. And so if you were thinking of doing something with some kind of digital assistant, digital chatbot, anything like that, if you add a digital human presence to that it's more effective, more likely to be welcome. It's not better than a person, and there's some other curiosities going on there. But basically, yeah, it's a good improvement over what's been available before now.
So in most cases, not better than a human, but better than all other forms of automation, essentially, that we've been using.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very context dependent. The thing about digital humans is there's a lot of focus on the digital human as if like it's a thing that's absolute in some sense. Like, is this as good or is this bad? Is it realistic or is it not realistic? And we've done research that's explored that. It's like, well, there's a big difference to the context that I'm viewing it in and to the individual that's doing the viewing. So in fact, this is like a kind of a co-created experience. So good example is if I gave you a picture or a digital avatar of my wife, you might say, oh my God, that looks completely realistic. It's fabulous. It's brilliant. I would know my wife incredibly well and I would find it, no, that's not good at all. I don't like that. It's wrong. And it's because of my context of having incredibly close exposure to her face and therefore knowing her so well. So that's one aspect. But even if you take somebody that neither of us maybe knows, and I'm guessing you don't know, say, Jennifer Anderson personally, I don't, but you recognize the face, and so you say, okay, that's somebody that I know in terms of a popular figure in media. Now, if I was to show you that face, and we're waiting for a flight at an airport, and we're in some kind of airport bar, and they have an old episode of Friends running, and it's on a 16:9 monitor, and that's stretched from 4:3 out to 16:9. So a circle is no longer a circle, but an oval. You're not going to sit there and go, "Oh my God, who is that up on the screen?" That's terrible. That's like some kind of alien. You're not going to have any adverse reaction. You'll just buy that it's Jennifer Aniston now with her head completely distorted. So it's kind of a curiosity there, right? Like in one sense, there's a subtlety in difference between somebody that you know and don't know being good or bad, which is a very completely contextually personalized experience. And the other, we'd both look at something that was heavily distorted and yet still quite happily watch it and not actually stop to comment on it. So human brains are marvelous things, but they're pretty darn interesting when it comes to faces.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that I've spoken to as well have said, "Well, that's all well and good, but I just like text and tables. That's how I'm like super analytical." People say, "Look, even in real life, I don't I don't care that much about people. I prefer to have a book in front of me. I like to read, and I think there's also that preference, and I'd much rather just maybe a website or a PDF document or a physical document, even better to learn and understand something than, let's say, having this digital human conversation, or at least maybe that's what they believe that they would like best."
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly occasions where you want information presented in text form. There's no sense that digital humans replace everything and everyone in every situation, especially if it's particularly like you need to find out a particular thing, you know how to do that thing, you know what that information is you want, you just want to quickly find it and scan it because you can effectively fast forward through that conversation to get what you want. So yeah, I mean, if I'm looking up something to do with the tides, because I sail a lot, or the wind speed is going to be on Saturday, I don't need a person. I can just look at that on a chart on a website and get the information that I want. That's great. That's contextually appropriate to getting that information. That being said, though, getting back to your PDF example, a lot of people would prefer to have a digital human explain to them a safety procedure in a couple of minute video than read a 5-page safety PDF, and they're much more likely to retain that information and actually therefore be presumably safer or better informed. So it does cut both ways. And again, this whole idea of when do I want a digital human? Like, you can't, the person matters, the situation matters, the type of information being conveyed matters. And yeah, if I want a diagram of something, then sometimes that's exactly what I want and nothing will make a difference. But I will point to the enormous success of YouTube in providing videos on how to do stuff. And these days, certainly in my family, if somebody wants to know how to do almost anything, they sort of just assume that there's going to be a video on YouTube showing how to do it. And I'm pretty sure in most of those cases that information will be out there in text form, but people just like going to a video where someone explains something to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that obvious trend, we start with text, then we move to voice, then we move to video. We've seen it with telephone conversations, mail, telephone, video conversations. We tend to always want to get that visual stimulus as part of our as part of our way of communicating, and I think that's natural to the way we are. We're used to human faces. We're used to having that direct visual connection.
I guess there's one other thing that's a huge difference. Sorry to interrupt you. There was one other huge difference is the interactivity. So what you don't get from the YouTube video, which you do get from a digital human, is the ability to interact. And so I don't know about you, but I've watched YouTube videos where they've skipped through something and I've wanted to ask a question effectively. I wanted to say, wait, what menu was that? What did you do there? Why doesn't mine work like yours? I'm not seeing the same thing that you're seeing, kind of thing. And none of that you can do in a YouTube video. So interactivity is the last dimension that makes a huge difference of why you'd want a digital human over a PDF or a video or just a written text. None of those things you can interact with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good point. So with the digital humans, we now have, all of the senses, except for let's see what we see and what we hear. The text that gets transmitted across. We have the interactivity. So we have quite a close to real life living partner situation that you can have a conversation with. What are the biggest, look on the other side, what are the biggest gaps or risks that you've seen in the research that you've done that we should, for pragmatic use cases, we should watch out for?
Risks in what respect? Like in terms of them being not
Things
successfully
that won't
implemented
work.
or?
Yeah, things that will stop it either from being successfully implemented or even if implemented well, still won't give us the results that we're looking for.
Well, I guess the biggest problem probably these days is we're less concerned, I think, with being able to produce a realistic digital human. What we're more concerned with is the interaction with it. And by that, we have both the latency problem, where something just seems to take an awfully long time to respond. So as a human, you just assume they haven't understood you. So you just start going on. Like you say something to a digital assistant, and the pause is so long, you just assume it's not working. So you keep going, which of course only compounds the problem. And then the second thing is there's a notion, obviously, of an uncanny valley, the notion that something's not good enough, and so it sort of puts you off, and that valley can be crossed. You can get something that looks very good. It doesn't have to be photo real or imperceptible from reality, but it has to be, pretty good, and that goes away. Well, the same sort of thing applies with a cognitive sense. Sometimes we nickname this the cognitive cliff. And so if something looks real, it looks intelligent, it seems to be having all the trappings of being a really sophisticated system that's going to provide you with what you want. And then it fails to be able to understand simple commands, understand what you're saying. It comes back with very repetitive, not very friendly responses. The cognitive dissonance between what you think it can do and what it's doing, the lack of expectation management, in other words, that it's you expect it to be clever and it's dumb, that can really cause a system to fail.
So much work has been put, I think, on this, on how it looks and getting that to being real. And even now going beyond that, trying to get all of those micro gestures and make it more and more emotional, which are all great things. But if that's not matched in equal parts to the level of intelligence that you now expected to have, then there's this was it cognitive dissonance, or there's this gap, between expectations and what you actually get, which which is also dangerous. And I think that's a really good point. I think everyone faces in this space the issues with latency. It could be the latency to create the digital human if you're trying to do that with like live rendering. You also have that if you're starting to use things like ChatGPT. And depending on the complexity of your ChatGPT search, it can be something that doesn't take 1 or 2 seconds. It can be something that, I've seen searches where you do something and it comes back like 10 seconds later, 15 seconds later with an answer. So I think there's a lot more issues with, this new world of generative AI. Yes, it can be great, but some of those delays make it less realistic in a conversational sense. If it's coming on the screen, you can wait. And if it has a long answer, you can start reading as it keeps on thinking about what the answer is going to be. But if you want a digital human and you want to get that sort of instant response, that is still in many cases a little ways off. I think that's a really, really good point. Now onto the exciting side. I mean, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say that there are enormous advances, and of course, that I guess comes down to partly to the implementation, because you need a huge amount of compute power to actually train a large language model, but you can have a localized large language model running in a relatively sort of modest, by computer standards, sort of GPU setup. So yeah, I think there's going to be some bad implementations that may or may not cause people to have negative reactions. But if you are to do them properly, there's a huge amount of promise that you'll be able to deliver, certainly in the short to medium term.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really good point regarding the large language models, getting them to work for us as opposed to just using the 1 or 2 big names that we see out there. Now, you've also done a lot of work on finding the really good use cases, the areas where it worked. And I'd love to hear your experience, your thoughts, either what you've done yourself or maybe where you've worked with other researchers or customers, as the case may be, where you've been developing these digital human solutions and you're starting to see really positive results. What would be some of these use cases? Maybe you give us an example or 2.
Well, I will, but let me throw one question back at you first, because I'd be really interested to get your opinion on this. What's your edge case of what a digital human is? Because for some people, a digital human is a fully embodied face, body type digital character that's driven by 3D and have an AI back. But then you get to this edge case with machine learning and neural rendering, and then the question becomes: if I was to have a different digital head and this body, is that a digital human? What's your definition of digital human? Because that'll heavily influence the use cases.
So I guess what we're trying to do here is find the most pragmatic business or life relevant use cases. It's not so much about the theoretical point of, where does a digital human stop and start versus an avatar versus this. It's really when you have let's say an embodied chatbot, which is a conversational AI where you have a face, a body potentially, you have the ability to have a conversation, and then potentially, a whole range of other features. It could be emotional AI. It could be, integration with some other kind of analytics or data, but doesn't have to be. If you're thinking of, let's say, the healthcare sector, you might want to link that to your watch and also know your heartbeat and all kinds of things that you could integrate there. But it really, at the minimum for me, it's a conversational AI of some kind with a rendered face and body, which is, as in most cases, I think nowadays, very realistic as a sort of CGI or even more like a deep fake type technology, which is from, as the eye can see, almost perfect. And then applying that in pragmatic solutions to get the best, let's say, best value out of it. It could be solving a critical shortage of staff. It could be providing personal support to someone who in need. It could be coaching. It could be consulting. It really could be anything, but where you're really leveraging at the very minimum a conversational AI with a human face.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, isn't it? Because it's like there's a huge gamut of opportunities there and a huge gamut of technical implementations of it. I mean, at one
Mhm.
end, there's unbelievably great work being done with training and in patient care. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you wanted to have a young doctor trained up, you obviously wouldn't want them to be exposed to actual patients until they're trained. And now I'm talking about a sort of the thing that what we would call a general practitioner or a general doctor would do in sitting down with someone and talking to them and trying to find out what's the root cause of the problem. And so that's a naturally important thing we need to train our young doctors up for. Well, in the past, they've done that by having actors being hired to come in and kind of present things and talk. And then they've had someone in the room kind of either watching it or a video camera kind of taping it to try and get an idea how people are going. But it's possible to obviously produce a digital patient that would come in and then start to be able to, you know, offer up symptoms, answer questions about what those are, which are importantly done interactively, right? Because I need, as a young doctor, to think of the right question to ask, and then I have to hear the responses and pick out what is the relevant information from that. And so that's been taken right the way through to people doing training with like an underage digital human that is perhaps got a masking situation. They're masking actual problems. They might have been sexually abused. They might have drug problems. They're masking those problems. And, you know, can the trainee doctor discover what the root causes are there, even though the patient is giving obtuse answers or disengaging for whatever reason? And you can get into a lot of interesting metrics there, like how long did it take? Did they miss some clues early on? Did they spend too long on the wrong thing? But similarly, you know, if they do ask or suggest, hey, we should get you in for a test, then of course you can provide actual real test results, obviously anonymized for whoever it originally was, but, you know, like a real test results back that they can look at. So in addition to me sort of talking to you as a young doctor, if I called up, I don't know, blood work, I could actually get a
Mhm.
proper printout of what blood work would look like to see if I could notice markers or whatever. So that's really interesting work that's been done. And even further than that, I sort of co-authored a paper with Mark Sager, Mark being by far the lead on this. I was just helping out, but on Baby X, where the whole process was to model the brain chemistry of the child so that you actually had a valid neurological model based on brain chemistry that would be simulated in the presence of the child, in which case the child is pre-conversational. I mean, they're just saying words like, you know, cat or sheep kind of thing, but they're certainly not able to articulate medical issues. And so here you would examine them and you could tweak the brain chemistry for what would be the result of a mother perhaps having a narcotics or a drug problem. And that would obviously have caused the child in vitro to have issues which would materialize as they were a young baby. And so now you've got really quite complex visual audio cues that you could pick up on to try and understand and do things. So that's one end of the spectrum. Up the other end of the spectrum, which is more to the neural rendering that you were discussing, we've done work where we've taken entire feature films. In fact, the team's now done 3 feature films and a series where they've taken the whole film and converted it all to a different language, where it looks like every actor is now speaking English, but they were actually filmed speaking another language. So the film might have been in French, and they
Oh
delivered
wow,
every
yeah.
line in French, and they just filmed it like normal, they edited it like normal. No one had dots on their faces, no one had anything special. And at the end of the process, go through and make it look like every single actor was speaking in English, as opposed to doing subtitles or dubbing. And I want to make a point here. We're not suggesting getting rid of subtitles because obviously the hearing impaired community really need those. But for a lot of people, seeing a foreign film when it's dubbed badly or in a different language is just going to be something that they're not willing to do. So yeah, there's a huge range of stuff there. In the middle, I mean, I could go on for hours. Great examples with fashion, in particular. That's been a big success story. So yeah, loads of examples.
So the first one I think is a really good example of that interactivity we are talking about earlier. So that sort of being, you know, the core of, I think, a digital human in that pragmatic sense of having a conversational AI that can converse with you, that can respond to what you say, mixed with having that face and those response, in even the emotional type responses. I guess the feature films and some of this fashion that we're seeing is less responsive. Usually, it's more about, I think, the fashion, you mean being able to try on the clothes, etc. But then we're also seeing these sort of digital personalities, and I guess they're going to be more and more responsive, where you can actually have a chat with so and so who's trying on certain clothes, on I think you find them on things like TikTok, where they're trying to build up followers. I think the next step from sharing videos of their lives, which I think they do many now, to actually being able to then have that conversation with them and ask them to maybe try on different things, and then you actually get this sort of this fashion digital human personality all in one.
Yeah, I will say though, with the fashion stuff, there is a lot of interactivity when, I don't know if you've ever done this, but like I've tried on digital shoes or whatever, and it's really important that it's interactive because you want to move your feet and you want to see whatever you're wearing. It's also the thing about the fashion industry is it's kind of an odd thing, and we covered this, I think, in a Harvard Business Review piece we did about 2 months ago. One of the big things you don't kind of think of with digital humans is these sort of weird ways that they completely change an economic model and make it super viable. And in fashion, there's an enormous amount of money spent on returns. And so if you can reduce returns, you can completely pay for your digital human program, many times over. It's like vast amounts of money. And so what influences you on returns? Well, it's that it didn't fit, which of course is the point you made about trying stuff on, but also, I didn't kind of know that the material would be like that. And so the interactivity and the ability to see how things actually flow, move, hang, the weight of them, a lot of those things come only if you can kind of manipulate them and see them. You don't get it from a picture or like an Amazon experience of just seeing a sort of a flat item there. And so apart from the money that you would necessarily save by not having returns, as I say, which is like ridiculous amounts of money, there's also all of the environmental aspects of having shipped all this stuff to someone and then have to ship it all back, and the waste involved in, if that material can't be then reused for whatever reason, especially with clothes, often can't be. So you've got waste, pollution, just environmental costs for energy. So there's a lot of aspects to this that makes the fashion industry actually a really interesting test case, in addition to the influencer stuff, which, as you rightly point out, is huge in terms of digital personalities, digital influencers online, and what they say about a brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's never excited me personally, but obviously it does for a lot of people. They have some huge followings. I guess I'm just not one to typically follow, these kinds of trends or fashions online. But, that is a use case just in itself of creating something that people want to follow. It's a digital star, if you will, from our old TV and video acting world, and they just create their own for their own purposes. So I think it's very cool. It shows changing times, and maybe my years on this earth as being as getting numerous.
It's actually also a really interesting example of how digital people scale. If I can use it just as an example there, like one of the things we haven't really discussed is this at scale. And if you think about it, the model for an influencer is, let's say we take a Kardashian, right? This is an individual person who would maybe endorse products and therefore be an influencer. Okay, so you could make a digital copy of that. And little Michaela is a good example, where she's a digital influencer that acts in a not dissimilar way to a Kardashian, in the sense that they are a presence online. It's a one-to-many model of them saying, hey, I really like these shoes, I really like this soft drink, whatever. Okay, but the other thing to understand is when you get a digital fashion, what you don't get is the ability for people to be able to be their own effectively fashion editors. Now, once you add digital humans into the mix, let's say you were somebody that was heavily into digital influencers, Kardashians, fashion, etc. Well, you could actually make up outfits, like multiple different items that would otherwise be separate in an e-store, put them together, and now you would be producing a fashion-forward look in the way that a fashion editor would do that. So while you yourself wouldn't be a mass influencer, you could be a micro influencer, because you would be given a platform that would allow you to take multiple different bits of stuff, style them effectively onto a digital human, and then place the digital human wherever you wanted, right? So I think it'd be really cool to have this style look, but in a Chicago basketball, court at night outside, and it's rained an hour before. And so that would allow you to not program, not to do any 3D at all, but actually produce that. And that then gives you kind of agency to be a micro influencer. And so once you multiply that, you start getting a ton of people offering their opinions, because it's so easy to do, but also it's incredibly influential. Because if my best mate, who I go sailing with, says, Mike, you've got to check out this thing because it's awesome and it's be really good for sailing, and I've got one and it's brilliant, well, of course I'm going to do it, right? Because I know him, I trust him, and he knows what I like because he actually knows me. And so that form of influence is incredibly strong on a buying influencer basis. Whereas if I just see, hey, let's say, some major yachtsman who is in the, America's Cup, says he uses these particular pair of gloves. I mean, yeah, sure, it's an influencer, but I'm not really going to have quite the same interest in going to the store and trying that thing out, because I just don't know them and they don't know me. So one of the things that digital humans give us is at scale. And it's at scale with interactivity. That's just dimensions we haven't seen before in these spaces.
I like that. I think it's quite interesting, and you bring in the two types of scale. One is the scale that you have because it's a digital human, so you can obviously scale one to or as many as you want, essentially with cloud computing and whatnot today. The other one is if you start having no-code platforms, you can scale in allowing people to scale. So you don't just need to create that one digital human for one purpose that you can scale widely. You can create a platform so that tens of thousands of people can each do the same thing, create their scalable digital human platforms or digital human solutions. So I think that's the scaling of the scaling effect with sort of no code capabilities is going to be huge as well. And it's something we're
there's another
seeing,
really
I think,
important psychological benefit in that as well, which is that if you are the person doing that micro influencing, like in other words, I'm the person that's doing this fashion forward look that I make up. Well, now I know this sounds weird, but because I've put my own effort into it, I actually care about it much more. So if you can get people to do something, to have skin in the game, for want of a better term, right, then they're going to be much more your brand ambassador, because they're not being paid and they're not, getting any kind of necessarily monetary reward, but they feel it's their thing, right? And so because they think it's their thing, they're pushing it, they're promoting it, and they're going to have an active interest. And it's just so interesting, the idea that instead of using a digital human to speed up something, right? We were talking before, like, is it faster to do something? Is it easier to do something? But in this case, we actually don't want to do that. In this case, what we want to do is make it slower. In fact, what we want to do is make them dwell on your website or dwell with your brand. And so the idea of dwell time is like, I'm going to hang out with this brand. I'm just going to do stuff with it. So if you were into collecting Nikes and you spent a lot of time in this digital human environment with these Nikes doing stuff, you're just investing a lot of yourself in the brand, which has currency to your friends, but also you yourself are incredibly engaged with the brand in a way that you just aren't if you go to a straight click and buy website. Yeah, the click and buy website is much faster to get in and out of, but I might lose myself for half an hour, mucking around with something with digital humans. But that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really, really good thing. And many advertisers and major organizations, even charities, would love to have that level of engagement with people. So if we can increase dwell time, not just make things more efficient, we're hugely successful with digital humans.
That's such an interesting point there, and it reminds me of last week, my own little experience. Just an example. I wanted to get a new pair of AirPods. Mine had broken. And I found that I could buy them online. But I literally was like, but I don't want to buy them online. Like, I always go into the shop, wait in line for like 15 minutes. Then I speak to someone and then they tell me the newest technologies and why this one is better than that one and take me through the process. And then I go and buy it. And then they say, do you want to get these extra things with it or whatnot? And that's the process that I've always done. And it's slow, but you dwell in this environment of the Apple Store, and you get used to it. You get excited a little bit by the opportunities, the art of the possible, the new technologies. And then the thought of buying it online kind of, it was like an affront. It's like, no, that's not how I want to buy that. I want to actually go back to that sort of experiential buying that I'm used to. So I think there's a lot, and everything else, I'll be like, okay, good, click, quality, yep, 4 stars out of 5 or 4.5 stars out of 5. That's good. I'll buy. Purely rational decision. Whereas this, I still haven't bought them because I'm still waiting to go to the shop. This was a much more emotional decision because that time that I spend there is always somehow interesting, and you learn something, and you get some kind of
it's experiential.
Yeah. If we can bring that world, instead of it being a multi-million-dollar shop on the most expensive street of, in my case, Zurich, then maybe you can start to, invest some of that time and energy creating that same experience, but in an online place.
Though may I say, having been to shops in Zurich, I love walking around Zurich. It's a great place and it's got great shops. And so, yeah, but the experience stuff is true. Like it's, so much the case that I think we have a habit of trying to do an analysis of new technologies based on their efficiency or their effectiveness with some kind of sense that we want it to be faster, better, quicker, cheaper. And, a lot of things in my life I choose to do, not because they're the quickest, the cheapest, the fastest, or the easiest. I do them because they're a good experience.
So as we're getting closer to the end, maybe one pre-question, then the final question. The pre-question would be, if you could wake up tomorrow, you get online to do whatever it is that you do in the morning when you get online, and you had a new service. It could be through your work, it could be private, it could be shopping, it could be healthcare, any of these use cases. What would be one example that would really excite you to be able to sort of get in there and do X? What would that X be?
Probably be having a digital assistant that could move effortlessly between devices and ecosystems. At the moment, we're a bit platform bound. Like I have a platform that allows this experience here and then a completely separate platform over here. I look forward to the day that I can have a digital assistant that I can invest time and energy in. And I would be in all of those connected spaces. So at the moment, and by the way, there's a great company in Los Angeles called Magnopus that's working on this. But at the moment, we have basically connected pages on the web. And their vision is to have connected spaces. And in those connected spaces, you need people, places, and things. And the people, you want them to be effortlessly able to move between them. So I don't care if I'm in Unreal Engine. I don't care if I'm on a Chrome browser. I don't care if it's on my iPad or it's on my car on the dash. I would like the same consistent experience of interacting with something that had knowledge. I don't want like sort of some sort of big brother thing that knows everything about me, but I just don't want to have to retrain cognitively to say Alexa instead of Siri. I don't want to have to think about, well, that's calendar is not in that calendar. And I don't want to have to think that that's not aware of this. And so, yeah, that shared spaces, but they're being three-dimensional spaces that have, a relationship to the space that I'm in. That's something that I'm really looking forward to. And yeah, that would probably be my first or second guess.
That there you're talking some pretty powerful steps. It's sort of taking, let's say, the best of Hey Google, integrating that with the best of digital avatars, and yeah, cross-device implementation. That's really forward-looking.
Well, you did give
I'd
me
like
the
to say
option.
a really forward-looking thing that is, is probably like 3 years away or 2 years away. It could happen pretty quickly, at least for certain ecosystems. And what's your wish now going forward? I mean, you're doing a lot of this research. Where do you think your personal focus is going to be in the next few years? What would you like to see being developed, and what do you want to get involved in?
Sure. What I really want to get involved in the most, and we've been working towards this for some time, but it definitely is being able to be more viable for doing proper research in, is acquired brain injuries. So, just in terms of strokes alone, there are about 15 million people that are going to have strokes this year. And of the 15 million people that have strokes, about 5 million will pass away, will die. About 5 million will fully recover, and about 5 million will live with some kind of impact, some acquired brain injury. And so before we have a cure, we have care. And so I think one of the great things for digital humans, and certainly what interests me a lot, is how we can make life better for those 5 million that would have otherwise a permanent and or very long-term acquired brain injury. And so that can vary in all sorts of things. But our ability to do this at scale, our ability to do it interactively, and our ability to have that moderate itself to the needs of the individual are tremendously exciting. And so, if you're suffering from an injury like that, you may have trouble taking in, for example, I did a TED talk about this. You have trouble taking in short-term memories. So my father had a stroke, and he knew me because I'd been in his life for decades, obviously. But he didn't really know his grandchildren because he couldn't form short-term memories to get to know them. But he knew me, and he knew me because it was this just different part of the brain that was accessing long-term memory. Now, if we were to think about his view of doing anything from a technological point of view, and I don't even mean now productively as a member of the workforce, but just even like using a phone, he has to learn new tech. And the trouble with that is it's very unfamiliar, and it will always be unfamiliar because you can't help but acknowledge that technology keeps changing. And if you can't adapt to new memories and new technologies, then it's always going to be unfamiliar and it's always going to be hostile. But if we put my face on that technology, now he would have not thought that I was in the computer or anything like this. I'm not talking about somebody that has extensive neurological trauma, but I'm talking about he would just see the face and he'd know it to be my face, and that would be familiar. And so in an environment where everything was unfamiliar and just alienating, it would be comforting if he could have seen my face on the technology, albeit that it's just a telephone and I'm just a interface between that new tech and his ability to take in those new memories and form those new skills. So that's the thing that I'm most interested in. I think that's the thing that we stand to be able to provide a huge amount of upsurge in. And look, it goes on a lot further than that. Even the people that are the carers for people that have acquired brain injuries often don't get a lot of good feedback because it's hard for that person to communicate through their face to the carer. So there are a lot of things we can do to actually improve that relationship and improve their, their care. Even if we can't necessarily, in our research anyway, look at a cure, we can certainly look at this huge group of people that will be dealing with all sorts of acquired brain injuries over the coming, year horizon, whatever we want to think of it as.
What a great use case, and I have seen your TED talk on this. I think I'm going to add this to the use cases we captured from today, because I think it's very pragmatic. It's certainly accessible even now, even today, and just a good example of the power of a human face. And in some cases, it's a generic face, and in this case, it's a very specific face, and how much value that could bring to those people that are being, have had these kinds of traumas. So look, thank you so much, Mike. That was really enjoyable. I think it's time to call this podcast to an end. But I really look forward to reading more of your research and maybe catching up again with you here when we have more to talk about.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I much appreciate it.
Hey, cheers.
This was the Real Digital Humans podcast. Please like, follow or subscribe to hear more.